we misunderstand the difference between being ready and being prepared. And very few people are ready for the big change in their life. You prepare all you want. But after you prepare, forget trying to be ready. Leap, and the net will appear. Love the Valentine's arrow through the head. Very nice,
Happy
very nice.
Valentine's Day. Let me welcome you, Brian Miller, my purple Valentine of the moment. There are a lot of numbers involved. Brian Miller, you're a magician, speaker, and author of the personal success book, 3 New People. Only 3? For 12 years, our first number. You've shared magic and your message with thousands of audiences, our second number. In 11 countries, third number. Across 4 continents, fourth number. You are based in Connecticut, and you perform a interactive blend of jaw-dropping magic and laugh-out-loud comedy at 200 plus fifth number events each year. I'm going to give you my existential bio. Brian Miller, you are a friend of purple. You, seed connection clouds. Your name, spelled dyslexic, is brain. Your mustache equals your 2 eyebrows. You, Miller connection. Your viral TEDx talk carries a heavy viral load and is highly contagious. You play air guitar ridiculously. And you are a philosophical friend of the absurd. Shazam!
I like yours better, especially because that first one is wildly outdated. All those numbers are bigger, and I haven't been a magician in years.
Oh, well, we'll need to get an update to your numbers. So thank you so much for coming here today to participate in absolutely nothing with me. It's very generous of you to give your time to the cause. And I wanted to ask you...
The cause of nothing?
Yes. The highly important cause of nothing. I wondered if you could share with me some of the strange episodes of your life. And specifically, I'm interested in your personal hero's journey. I understand that you came from a lot of social anxiety in your childhood and challenges in your home structure and a lot of difficulty as you were coming up. And so could you speak to that a little bit in terms of your journey from broken into whole?
I don't know if I think of myself as whole, but I can certainly start with broken. Yeah, I mean, so I guess the first thing is that I don't want to present my story as if it were a sob story. I came from upper middle class, well-off parents. I never wanted for anything in my life. Even in the struggles to build my magic career, even when I was struggling to pay my own rent, there was no real risk to my life in terms of being homeless or something like that, because there were well-off parents in a different state that I could have just fallen back on, and there were always safety nets in my life. So I'm not going to present it as if there weren't. So just to get that out of the way first, because some people really do not have any safety nets and still manage to do things far more impressive than what I've done. Given the amount of privileges I was born into, it almost would have been more shocking if I hadn't succeeded in some way. So I don't know if my success should be, whatever it is, should be taken as something monumental. But I can certainly speak to the brokenness. came from a broken home, which today, if you say that, it's like, so what? 55% of parents are divorced or whatever. But when I was a kid, that was not the case. I was pretty much always the only kid in any room who had divorced parents, whose parents were not together, any classroom, any play date. Friends didn't, other kids didn't know what that even meant to not have their parents together. But I have no memory of my parents being together. They were married for some amount of years, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, something before I was born. I was born, and they were divorced before I was one. I think they were divorced before I was 8 months old or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. And my mom remarried before I was two to my stepfather. So I have no memory of him not being in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Also, so my mom, my dad, and my stepfather, Kevin, the three of them have always been in my life and have always been to two different homes. And it presented interesting challenges, especially when I was much younger, elementary school and things like that. They lived in different towns, adjacent towns, but different towns. So I had to remember which day of the week to get on which bus. And if I messed that up, if I got on the wrong bus because I forgot which house I was supposed to be at, there wasn't anybody home waiting for me because they were at work, because they weren't expecting me. And that happened a few times. So I had to learn about, if you ever accidentally end up here, here are the four neighbors who know to look out for you and what their names are, and you can go to them and call. That there was a weird level of anxiety that I guess in retrospect I never felt anxious about it when I was that age, but looking back, it was clearly chaos in a managed way. It was a chaos that I was just used to and didn't realize how unusual it was until I was much older.
Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a foundation of chaos, we could say.
My grandmother, she used to laugh and tell a story that when I was a little kid at one point, I don't know, maybe elementary school, I came home and I was so excited to tell them that I did so well in the class assignment that day. And she just got giddy when she told this story. She got this big smile because the class assignment had been, we were learning about extended families, which was a foreign concept to kids when I was in elementary school. So we were
Mm.
learning about step siblings and half siblings and removed and all this stuff. And so kids, we were told in the class, raise your hand if you have anybody in your family who's a step sister or a half brother or a half. And she said, I came home and said, I got 100. I had to raise my hand for every single thing, right?
Mm.
So, like every possible thing you could have, I had, and I think even my teachers didn't realize that. Probably started looking at me differently
Mm-hmm.
from that point on. But yeah, so it was my normal life. It wasn't weird to me in a way that if you're 12 and your parents get divorced, which is what happened to my little sister, who I have a big age gap with. When she was 12, my mom and my stepfather, Kevin, divorced
Mm.
her dad. She was thrown into a very different kind of chaos as a preteen girl, where both of her older brothers had already left the house, one in
Mm-hmm.
college, one adult. That's a very different kind of chaos than the chaos I was in, which was I never knew a different world than
Mm-hmm.
that.
So we could say you were almost born into chaos, and you were finding your way from a very early age in that, and learning to navigate, learning to organize, and perhaps, you speak of this phrase, leap and the net will appear. It's as if you were managing your own sort of structural safety net, really, from the start of your life.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know where you found that, but I usually cite it as my all-time favorite quote. It's been kind of a, if I were the kind of person who had motivational posters on the wall, and I'm not, that would be probably the one that would be somewhere in my office.
Mm-hmm.
I almost had it commissioned once from an artist who creates carvings out of wood and things like that.
Mm. Can we
Wouldn't have fit
talk a
my
little bit more
aesthetic in
about
here.
that?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Leaf and the net will appear. I actually don't, you can't really trace the origins of it, which is interesting. If you Google, you end up in kind of a black hole of nothingness. It's kind of anonymous. I've seen some places, it's an old acting expression. I've seen in a traditional actor's expression, but it's hard to know where it came from. I think I heard it for the first time when it was quoted in a book written by a magician who was kind of formally my hero as a when I was a younger magician. He was one of my big heroes, and he had written a book about the theory of magic, not the tricks themselves, but magic theory, how to be a magician instead of doing magic. And I had never read a book on theory in magic before, and it was interesting. I found that book at a time in my life when I was still a college student studying philosophy. So it was like I was a magician studying philosophy, and then I found a book about magic theory, and it blew open my brain. The book was called Beyond Secrets, which is also where I many years later ended up drawing inspiration from the title of my podcast, Beyond Networking, which I only just realized this second in this moment as I just said that to you. It's funny. Yeah, yeah, that's funny. It just occurred to me that that's actually where that was in my psyche, my subconscious, is this book Beyond Secrets. Yeah, and he quoted that, leap and the net will appear. And I remember reading it and just thinking, I was transfixed by the phrase, but I didn't really know what it meant. And I think I invented a meaning for myself, and I've just since used that phrase to attach my, for whatever I've given it meaning for. And what it means to me is not like not jump out of a plane without a parachute. Some people, they read into stuff like that. It's like, oh, I should just, take the leap. It's like, no, you should prepare, right? You should take safety. You should do practice runs and take safety training and learn how parachutes work before you jump out of a plane. But then jump, right? Because there isn't a net. No matter how much you've prepared for that leap, and I would never go skydiving. This is a weird metaphor. I would never do it. But if you're going to go skydiving, do the training, learn how to use a parachute, make sure you've got your instructor with you, all of those things, make sure the wind is right that day and there's nothing egregious, but then leap. Because the only way that you're going to discover if you are a parachuter, a skydiver rather, or not, is if you actually jump out of the plane after you've done the preparation. And it's one of these things where so many people, I think me included, from time to time still, we misunderstand the difference between being ready and being prepared. And very few people are ready for the big change in their life. You prepare all you want. But after you prepare, forget trying to be ready. Leap, and the net will appear. And the net may not be what you think it's going to be. I think that's one of the things that I've learned, is that you think the net is like some safety net that's going to catch you and you're not going to fail. Like somehow magically you're not going to fail. You're going to fail a lot. But a lot of the nets come in the form of how you fail and what you learn from it. So leap, and the net will appear.
And what instances can you recall in your life from when you did leap and what net was there for you as you did or after you did?
Yeah, great question. So well before I'd ever heard that expression, I can think of probably the first major leap I ever took, which was in 8th grade. I got on stage for the school's talent show, middle school talent show. And I got on stage and played guitar in a band to do one song, which was from the movie Eddie and the Cruisers, which was one of my dad's all-time favorite movies about a fictional band. It's a movie about a fictional band in the 50s who were revolutionaries. And it's a beautiful movie. More people should see it. And movie came out in the 80s, I think. And so we did a song from that, a movie that nobody had seen, even adults. Kids wouldn't care about at all. A song that these kids had never, I think back on it now, I can't believe I did that. I wouldn't do it now, probably. You know what I mean? Like, I got I had only started taking guitar lessons 8 weeks before that. So I had never played guitar before, about 2 months before that. I probably knew 4 chords. The only 4 chords that were in this one song was, I literally knew how to play the chords in that song and how to play that song. Probably very badly. But I assembled 3 other kids, a drummer, a bass player, and a singer that were all in our class, and said, here's this song you've never heard of that sounds nothing like the music all of kids today listen to. We should do it at the talent show in front of 800 judging middle schoolers. and we did it. And um, it was a huge success. I My girlfriend at the time kissed me for the, I was, 8th grade. Girlfriend kissed me that night for the first time. You know, probably the first kiss, second kiss I'd ever had, and one of those moments, you'll never forget as a just stays with you. But more than that, the next day, some of my teachers I remember coming up to me before or after class and saying, Brian, I had no idea you played guitar. That was so cool. And I had never been recognized for anything that wasn't academic in my life. I was a straight A student. I broke the curve in every class. Kids hated me in every class because I broke the curve by getting 108s on tests. Again, that's the luck of birth. My parents are both literal geniuses, and so luck of birth, had the genes. I didn't study. I just had it. That kicked my ass later in life when not studying catches up to you at some point. But at that age, I just aced everything. So I'd been recognized for academics, but nobody had ever recognized me for something that was, I guess, not in my DNA. Even though both my parents were musicians, like it wasn't like I'd been groomed all my life, like on an instrument. I had just started playing guitar. So yeah, it was powerful. That was, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's
I
a
don't know
lot
if
of
I've ever
numbers
told
in
that
there
story.
too. In 8th grade, after only 8 weeks of guitar lessons and 4 chords with 3 kids and 800 pairs of eyes judging you, you had your first kiss.
Why
And
are you
huge
so
success.
focused on my use of numbers? I'm so curious.
Well, I think it's rather magical. And aren't you a mathematician oriented?
I have a math degree. I would not call myself a mathematician, but I do have a math degree. Both my parents are mathematicians, computer scientists. My father's a PhD in mathematics. It's one of those things I just did naturally. Math came naturally. Hated math. Hated it.
Came naturally,
Just came
but you hated
super
it.
easy. Yep. Got a math degree because why not? Didn't have to think about it. Why not get a why not get a math degree if it was so easy? Yeah.
Well, let's go back to leap and the net will appear. It reminds me
Sure.
of build it and they will come from Field of Dreams. Have there been other episodes in your life in which you did leap and the net did appear?
Yeah, I mean, the next big one was probably the very next year. I was a freshman in high school, new school, transitioned to from my mom's school district to my dad's because I actually, despite that beautiful moment at the end of 8th grade, my middle school experience was pretty miserable. I was bullied very, very badly, mostly friendless for all of middle school. And I say bullied in the traditional sense of getting beat up in locker rooms. This was before the days where teachers really cared. They didn't. It wasn't. One time I got beat up really, really badly by my my middle school villain, basically. This kid who just tormented me for 4 straight years. And I got, he really knocked me to the ground and hurt my glasses and all kinds of things. And that day it had been enough of it. And I remember I went home really in tears to my mom, and my mom did what any good loving mother would do. She tried to fix it. And I get it as a parent now. And I remember hating her for trying to fix it because what she did made it so much worse by accident. She called the principal. So my kid's getting beaten up, and she gave him the. I thought I was telling her this in confidence. I didn't realize there were going to be real world ramifications, And so the next day, I got called out of a class. The intercom came on, the system in the school, and Brian Miller got called down to the principal's office. I'd never done anything wrong in my life. Literally, like it was fascinating. I was like straight, perfect everything. I thought I was in trouble. I was freaking out. And I got down, and it was even worse than I could imagine. It was worse than being in trouble. When I walked into the principal's office, my bully, Eric, was sitting there waiting for me. And the principal had us hug to make things better. Oh, yes. So guess who got beat the crap out of on the way home from school that day? and pretty much tormented for the next 2 years. I think that was sixth grade, for the rest, for the rest of middle school. You know, good intentions, but I needed to shift schools. I needed to go to a different school district, start over, new people who didn't know me at all, reinvent. So I went to my dad's school district, which had the #1 public high school in Western New York, which was also a benefit of switching over there. It made sense for someone with my grades and things like that. And I was exploring magic a lot. I was exploring guitar, of course, because I'd been playing for a year or so now, playing guitar a lot, but also getting into magic again. I had been into magic all my life. My dad, my grandfather, they loved magic. They always did tricks and took me to shows. And I met a kid in one of my ninth grade classes who was also new in town, I think just a year earlier. He had been the new kid in school a year earlier. So we had that in common, kind of. And we hit it off. And one day he was doing a card trick in ninth grade. He was doing a card trick for some kids before class started. And I saw it and I knew how to do the trick. And I said to him, I have that trick deck. Like, it was like a trick deck you get on like vacation from a magic shop. I said, I have that too. And he came over after school, or I went to his house, whatever it was that day. And we started doing magic together. And we started learning magic together. And you can't learn magic by yourself. Kids who learn magic by themselves don't stick with it, because magic is built on secrets. The problem of magic is you're not allowed to talk about it to anybody who's not a magician. So you have to get into magic with other magicians. You have to have friends who are magicians, so you have a way to talk about it. And he and I pushed each other. And it's so wild, 22 years later, whatever it is now, we still talk on an almost daily basis. We are best friends to this day. We've never left each other's lives, and we live in different states. I haven't lived near him in almost 16 years. I left after high school, never went home really, but we still talk. I talked to him yesterday, twice, and anyway, so we got into magic together, and we did it for each other, which was wonderful. But I could never bring myself to do a magic trick for anybody who wasn't Adam. And I really wanted to do magic because, again, in the same way that magic is built on secrets, you can't talk about it to somebody who's not a magician. You also can't do magic for your own enjoyment. It's maybe the only art form in existence that you can't do simply for your own enjoyment. Guitar, I can play for 3 hours by myself in a room and enjoy it purely for the act of creation. Right, for the guitar itself. You can play guitar to an empty room and enjoy it. You can paint for yourself. You can write in a diary for yourself. There's so many things, and I've done a lot of these things. You can draw. I used to cartoon a little bit, and never show it to anybody and get something cathartic out of it for yourself. Magic, you can't fool yourself. You actually can't do the art form unless there's an audience. It doesn't work. And so after having done magic all my life and never showed anybody a trick, never actually gotten the reaction of magic, just learned it, practiced it, did it, and then never got the reaction. One day I was sitting at lunch in ninth grade, and I was sitting with some other kids. These were not friends. We were just all kind of social rejects, all sitting at a table eating lunch separately, kind of a thing, with no friends. And for some reason, something came over me. I'll never understand how it happened or why. I was just so excited about some card trick Adam and I had been working on recently, and I just needed to show it to somebody and get the reaction that it deserved. And so I said to these kids, strangers at this table, I said, "You want to see a card trick?" And they were just like, "Okay." Kind of like, maybe if we just play along, he'll go away or something. And I stood up and I got my cards out of my backpack, and I was shaking, like freaking out, right? But I somehow managed my way through it. And these kids' jaws just hit the floor. And they started flipping out like you see on TV now, on Instagram or whatever, where people start knocking chairs over. They flipped out. And then they started telling everybody and going, hey, you got to see this kid. Hey, do that for my buddy. Do that for this guy. Do that. And I was Magic Kid. I was Magic Brian right away, instantly. Like a couple months into a new school, I had a personality, I had a persona. The cool kids wanted to be around me because I did magic. I got invited to parties because I did magic. So that was a leap in the net will appear moment, and I have no idea. But it changed my life. I mean, magic saved my life. It gave me confidence in myself. It gave me a way. It gave me a buffer to be able to talk to people and connect with them, which eventually I had to learn how to do without magic. But it's a great tool
Mm-hmm.
for social outcasts. Magic has always been a safe haven for social outcasts. It's a beautiful art form.
Wow, what an incredible story, Brian. And it does harken back to me to the hero's journey in that there you were in school with this arch villain who was essentially your call to adventure because it's as if he was closing the door for you on one location and in doing so kind of pushing you forward and out into the next one. Like there's a word in the Indian language which is nimit, which means an instrumental doer. I know
Ooh,
that
I like that.
Carlos Castaneda used to call it petty tyrant. So what was the name of that boy?
Eric.
So Eric took the role of the petty tyrant to basically catapult you over to this new school. And there you met an ally, which apparently comes as well in the hero's journey.
That's
And
so funny. Yeah.
with the power of the presence of that ally, somehow you managed to erupt some magic and start connecting and building connections and building networks of connections.
Yeah. 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 It was I didn't I didn't realize it was transformative when it was happening, you know. It's like your life happens and like, we don't notice the things on a daily basis. It was just a thing that happened that day, and then the next day I did whatever happened that day, and you know, but then you look back and you can just see these like windows of time where things could have been so different than they
Mm-hmm.
are. You could have ended up on such a different path. You
Mm-hmm.
know, what are the odds that this kid was using the exact same trick deck one morning and I happened to get to class
Mm-hmm.
early enough to notice it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and who knows? Who knows? I might have been a mathematician.
Yeah, you you might still be. There's a line from an Alanis Morissette song, which is she says, "Thank you, India," and it refers to thank you to all the uncomfortable and challenging moments that push us to new places. So I guess we can
Mm.
give a small existential thank you to Eric for being your
Oh yeah.
Nimitz.
It's true. It's and that's such a hard thing to talk about, though, because I get nervous in the self-helpy community and the personal development community where when people start talking about, you know, it's really important that you go through these, like, you need to, like, it's good that you went through this difficult or traumatic thing because there's a line. I know that being bullied made me stronger, it made me creative, but I hope my son never does. And I will do everything in my power to prevent him from going through the same thing, even though I know that I came out better for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know I came out better for it. I know how I came out. I don't know how I would have turned out if I hadn't been bullied. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really, it makes me nervous because there's the survivorship bias, which is really powerful, that we only hear the stories of things that happened and not the things that didn't, right? In other words, I succeeded, therefore I have a success story. We don't know what would have happened if it had gone the other way. Maybe I would have been more successful, a kinder person, earlier, right? Maybe I wouldn't have hurt as many people as I ended up hurting in my early 20s or in my late teens to eventually become this person that I am now. Maybe, like, there's so many unknowables when you talk about, well, I went through this terrible thing and I'm better for it. It's like, well, no, you're different for it, and
Mm-hmm.
and you like who you are now, and you're happy for who you are now. But it could have been better the other way, and so I just get a little nervous about the narrative that trauma or adversity creates strength,
Mm-hmm.
because most people who've been through real trauma, like I was bullied, I would call that like lowercase t
Mm-hmm.
trauma.
Mm-hmm.
There's people who've been through capital T trauma, and a lot of them are my clients and some friends and colleagues. And I got to tell you, they would all say the same thing. And I've heard them all say this. They all say they are stronger for having gone through it, but they wish they didn't have to go through that to become stronger.
Mm-hmm.
That they would never choose to go through it to become this person.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what happened. So I don't know if that's a random tangent, but it made me think of that. And I just thought,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I get so nervous about that narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And are you more nervous about it because you're a father? If you weren't a father, would you have felt the same way?
Yeah, because 3 years ago I started writing a book about that. And I went on hold when the pandemic happened. I needed to focus on just making money to make sure my career stayed in order, and not on a book that was never going to make any money. But I was writing a book about that, about the role of luck in success, which is where the survivorship bias comes in. For a year, I had 70 or 80 pages written already on that, well before I had a kid. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was something I had started noticing and been thinking about a lot.
Would you mind saying what the survivorship bias is?
The survivorship bias is you only hear the stories of people who survived something.
Mm-hmm.
So every time you hear a story of a college dropout becoming a multi-billionaire genius who changes the world, there are hundreds of thousands probably of dropouts who didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
For every story you hear of a band that somehow just kept doing the shitty gigs and made it and became world famous, there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of bands who never made it and you will never hear from. And so the survivorship bias is that the stories of success are only told by people who've been successful. We're not giving a microphone to people who didn't make it. And if we gave a microphone to everybody who didn't make it, it would overwhelm and drown out the stories of the people who did.
Mm-hmm.
That's the survivorship bias.
Well, fortunately, there is something called the Darwin Awards.
There are the Darwin Awards. Yes. Yes.
So that
But
keeps the balance
so
in
where
the
the
universe.
yeah. Yeah, but it's just the reason it's called a bias is because the way our storytelling brains work is we see someone who's been successful and we see, well, they just kept getting up. They just got up one more time. That idea that everyone told them was a bad idea, they just kept pursuing it. And look, eventually J.K. Rowling, somebody after 30 rejections or whatever it was, said yes. The problem is the survivorship bias is us going, oh, therefore, we draw an incorrect conclusion. We go, therefore, if your book idea has been rejected 30 times, just keep trying because somebody eventually will buy it and make you a multimillionaire. The truth is, almost definitely that will not happen. Almost everybody trying to get a book published will fail, right? Almost everybody, because that's the way the industry works. And so if you have this storytelling brain that tells you, well, I'm going to learn from the one success story out of a million and draw conclusions on how to approach it from that, I'm very likely going to be depressed and frustrated. And you don't have the ability when you do that to recognize that maybe your book's just not very good. And maybe you should start over, or maybe you should invest in a writing coach, or maybe writing's not for you. Maybe writing just isn't your thing, and there's a different thing that you could be doing and excelling at, but you'll never find it if you're just looking only at the 1 in a million writer who got the book deal and saying, I'm just going to do whatever they did. That's the problem of the survivorship bias, is it blinds you to the opportunities that you could actually excel at if you were willing to let go of the thing that you're so desperate to succeed at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sounds like you're really passionate about people opening their eyes in their blind areas. So to not just be kind of locked on foolishly to stories that don't pertain to them, perhaps, and instead become aware of the reality of where they are and the possibilities that are within their own reach. What else would you say about, because obviously you're concerned, you feel a caring about this area in between the people who succeed as survivors and we could say the lowest end of the spectrum, which is the Darwin Awards, who also gain some publicity. So you have a big caring about the gap in the middle. What would you
Yeah.
say positively in that? What would you bring?
What advice would I give? Uh,
Or what's your thing about that?
yeah. My thing about that is there are a set of personality traits and skills and techniques that the people who are the successful people that we're looking up to, and when I say successful, I mean however you define success in your field and the thing that you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at, right? There's no global definition here. When you're looking at all these people who've been successful and trying to figure out why you haven't been, there's something that there are commonalities between what they're all doing, and most of the people who've been really successful are unconsciously or subconsciously doing the same handful of things or have the same handful of personality traits or techniques or strategies that they've developed. And because it's unconscious for them, it's part of just how they developed naturally. When they when you ask them how they've been successful, they're not going to tell you those things because they
Mm.
don't realize that's why they've been successful. They're going to invent a hero's journey for themselves. They're going to make it perfectly fit a story archetype that feeds the survivorship bias
Mm.
because they're the hero of their journey.
Mm-hmm.
So what you need to do is stop listening to what they're telling you that they were successful, how they were successful, and look at across all these different people, what are the things that they're doing? And there are a handful of things. And this is why I was writing a book about, and I'll
Mm.
get back to and finish at some point, is what are the things that make people able to be lucky on purpose? Because doesn't it seem as some of these really successful people, they're just like, what are the odds, right? You just look at them and you go, what are the odds that they were in that place at that time with that person? And so the book I've been writing is called Lucky on Purpose: The Art of Being in the Right Place at the Right Time. And the question is, how do you be lucky on purpose? And one of the things, which is something very dear to me, is to focus a lot more on the connections you build, the network you weave, the relationships you have, the way that people feel in your presence, to focus a lot more on that than the skills of the trade. Like, you got to be good at whatever you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have to be as good as you think you do, honestly. A lot of the people at the top of every field are actually not the best people in those fields. We see this everywhere
Mm-hmm.
in terms of their skills. Like, go to any rinky-dink jazz club in New York City with 3 people watching, in the audience, an empty room, and you will see some of the best musicians on planet Earth who will never be given a platform. And then you look at the people making billions of dollars or multi-millions of dollars as pop stars who literally can't even sing well enough in the studio in perfect conditions to not need autotune.
Mm-hmm.
How are they making it? And the jazz musician who's brilliant can't. Well, it's probably because that person who made it is really good at being around people.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the big reasons. They're really good at people. They make people feel seen and heard and valued and understood in their presence, and people want to be around them. And when people want to be around you, they will open doors. They
Mm-hmm.
will introduce you to people. And so if you can develop that and be in the top 5 or 2% of all the people at the skill itself, oh my God, the world is your oyster. And that's just one strategy that people who are lucky on purpose use,
How
is
many
connection, but it's one
strategies
that
do you
obviously
describe in your book?
I think there's somewhere between 6 and 8, depending on how long I want the book to be. And connection. I mean, actively making connections with people and working on your interpersonal skills is a big one.
Okay. So, are you still working on your book?
I took a pause when COVID started, and I have really not returned to it since, as life has taken me in some other directions, but nobody's waiting for it either. There's no publisher banging down my door. I'll get
Okay.
back to it at some point.
Well, it does sound very exciting, and clearly you're very passionate about it. So, the number one topic from your book that you brought to us is also deeply ingrained in your life story, and I'd say it must be your core value,
Yeah.
which is to build connection, build your network, and let people know that they're seen and heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And would you tie that back to the foundation of chaos that you were facing as a child? That would you say that in your childhood that's where you built that muscle of kind of even just finding your way with the bus stops and finding those anchor people that you could rely on if you took the wrong bus in the wrong direction or.
Yeah, I think that would make a nice, tidy hero's journey origin story, but I don't think so. I think
Okay.
that that's the kind of story that we invent by accident or by
Mm-hmm.
nature or whatever. And that's the kind of thing that is so tempting to do, to retrofit
Okay.
your story to fit who you are. But I will say it was the second story you asked me about, when you asked me for another, the next moment of leap in the net will appear. It was the magic moment. I mean, learning how to wow uh, an intimate group of people. You know, close-up magic is so intimate. You're in the trenches of human psychology, you know, and the way that people, because you're showing you're inches from somebody's face. It's as
Mm-hmm.
intimate as it gets,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you're showing them something that is actually impossible, cannot happen, and yet in that moment they are 100% convinced it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that conflict, that tension, is what magic is. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's a moment of, I define magic. My personal definition of magic is the moment of conscious conflict between knowledge and evidence. The
Ooh.
moment of conscious conflict between knowledge and evidence. It's the moment where you have to fight with your own senses and your own intellect, and you have to go, I know that is impossible, but all of my available evidence tells me it's happening anyway. And what do I do with that? Right? And that's the moment people break. And so putting people through um, one of the most bizarre internal experiences they'll ever have in their life, that moment, that inner conflict between their own intellect and their emotions that they're aware of. And that's why I say it's a conscious conflict. Those conflicts happen to us all the time that we're not aware of, and they come out in therapy years later. This is a conscious conflict. You are aware of the break in your soul that's happening in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. You are very aware of the problem. And because you're so aware of it, magicians, we have to be a great magician, you can't simply give somebody that break, because that is not an enjoyable experience. It's a very uncomfortable, very painful experience for people to have that. So why do people love magicians? Well, they don't mostly. People don't love magicians. They love some magicians,
Mm-hmm.
right? They love certain magicians they've seen. They can always tell you about a magician they saw that they didn't like, that they hated, that they thought was arrogant or obnoxious. They say, and they'll tell you too, because people tell me about the magicians they saw. They'll just, anybody on the street finds out I'm a magician. I'll say, let me tell you about this magician I saw, and they'll say, this guy was such an ass. They say the tricks were amazing. I have no idea how he did it, but he was such a jerk. I didn't enjoy it at all. That happens a lot. So great magicians, what we do is we find ways to bridge the gap between what I know, which are the secrets, and what you're not allowed to know as the audience, right? That when you're a magician, you have to create a shared experience where everybody gets uplifted and transformed for the better. In other words, you have to actively get rid of the I know something you don't know, contentious relation. Magic is very contentious at its core. It's a self-defeating art form, right? In some senses, because it's an art form designed not to connect with people in many ways. And so, to do great magic, you have to rise above that and find a way to present that conflict in a way that uplifts people instead of destroys them. And so that learning how to do that as a magician is where I discovered how to connect with people for real.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not do it well in my personal life, right in tandem with learning how to do it as a magician for years and years. I was terrible at connecting with people in my personal life, while I was phenomenal at it on stage. And the breaking point is what I describe in my TEDx talk, and how I learned how to take what I learned on stage and make it in my personal life. And somebody can watch my TEDx talk to find out about that, but that's where that came from.
Mm-hmm. Well, given my fascination with existentialism, I find that actually very profound, because what you're describing is that the innate structure of magic is that you open almost an existential chasm for people, and you open this kind of abyss that, if you don't care for and curate that abyss, could be very destructive to people. And people, fundamentally, existential crisis is not an enjoyable thing. So I appreciate that you have the tenderness of heart and conscientious, caring spirit that you do, which is that as you learned that this was the basis of magic, you're opening these mini existential crises for your audience. At the same time, you are bringing that safety net. You're providing that support to the audience. You're curating a certain level of security and comfort for them so that then they can, I assume, access something greater. What is it that your ideal goal to create for the audience as a result of the magic?
That's a really good question, and a question I'm not sure anybody has ever asked me on a podcast or in any interview is, what is your actual goal? And that says a lot about the way you think through stuff like this, because I think most magicians haven't answered that question for themselves. And in my early years, I had not either. And it was a mentor of mine, an early mentor of mine, who forced me to, one, come up with my own definition of magic, which I also had never done. And I remember him saying, "What is magic?" And I was like, "What do you mean, what is magic?" You know, and then my mind just went blank, and I was like, "I don't know." And then he looked at me, he said, "What hope do you have of delivering magic to an audience if you can't even tell me what it is?" Mm-hmm. And I was like, like this moment that just like broke my soul. Like, it was like, so do I quit magic now? Like, what's the next step from this conversation? Yeah. And his assignment to me was go home and write an essay, and answer the question, what is magic, and write as long as it takes you. Write. I was like 17 when this happened. Write. And then he said, and then after you've done that, see if you can cut it down to half as long, and then see if you can cut it down to 2 pages, and then see if you can cut it down to 1 page, and see if some point in your life, in your magic career, you can get it down to 1 sentence. And when you can get it down to 1 sentence, then, and only then, will you really be able to give that experience of magic to an audience, because then you'll know precisely for yourself what it is. And that's how I eventually came to it. It took years, probably 2021. It was years and years. I was almost out of college by the time I finally realized magic, for me, is the conscious conflict between knowledge and evidence.
Is that the 1 sentence?
That's my 1 sentence. Magic is the moment of conscious conflict between knowledge and evidence. It's kind of a clinical definition, but it was the one that made the most sense to me in the way I saw it and in my experiences. So then to your point, to your question, so what's the goal? That's like kind of the next question. It's like, one, you really ought to know what magic is if you're going to be a magician, supposedly. And 2, I think many magicians, just like I had never thought of the question, what is magic? Many magicians have never in their lives asked themselves, what's the goal? Because I think they think, well, the goal is to do some awesome tricks and people love it. That's nice. But, there's a lot of cat videos that make people happy too. Like, why magic? Why go through all the effort? You know how hard it is to be a magician? You know what well, maybe you don't, but the amount of dexterity and skill and practice and patience and understanding of human psychology, like magic is I've been in a lot of art forms, and it's not even the one I make a living in anymore. And I got to tell you, there's nothing like it. It is so hard. Why go through all that if just to give people a laugh for an hour? I mean, they can get a laugh from a movie. They can get a laugh anywhere. Why magic? What's the point here? For me, and every magician answers this differently who has thought of an answer. For me, I decided to use my magic, and I designed a show accordingly. I ended up ripping down my show and rebuilding it to answer this question, to actually speak to this. I built a show that was designed mostly, apart from having fun, it was mostly designed to show people the flaws in their own cognitive biases, to make them much more aware of their own problems in logic and how easily and in very stupid ways they could be deceived. If I can deceive you with something as stupid as a couple of squishy red balls, think about what's happening out there in life, right? In politics and in religion and in your community and in your arguments and with your friends and at school and in all these places. Think about how easy it is. If I can fool you with something this stupid, like a card trick, right? This doesn't matter. Now go realize what's out there, what people can do who understand this stuff but aren't doing magic shows. That became the purpose for me. is let's really understand what's at stake here. It's a lot more than card tricks, which is why I actually personally don't mind if people know how tricks work. There's a lot of magicians get really angry about exposure. I don't really care. I don't think it's the point. I know how green screens work. I still love the Marvel movies. Doesn't take away the magic, you know. So yeah, for me, the answer to what is it all for? It became, you know, let me use this art form to show people something about how they think through the world and how they collide with the world, to hopefully give them a better chance at not being deceived when it actually matters.
Wow. So your why around magic, and this came through a very extensive process of distilling what is magic, and then why are you so deeply involved in it? And you discovered over the course of this years-long distillation process, you discovered that what you really care about, perhaps, I mean, I'm just seeing if this is a match to what you just said. What you really care about is people not being vulnerable to cognitive biases and flaws in their logic, that it's almost like you cared to protect people from how they think, and maybe to their blind spots.
I don't know if it's protect, but I think because I think that sounds that feels a little godlike, and there's nothing like that. But it's not I don't think it's my job to protect my audiences. I just think it feels like I've been given a supreme responsibility, which is any entertainer is given this responsibility, which is you have a group of people, strangers, attention for an extended period of time. This is very rare, right? Somebody gives me an hour of their undivided attention in today's world, especially. Think about the world. I mean, that is very unusual. And so if I've been so lucky by my choices in life and some of the accidents of my life to be given that attention, I feel I have a responsibility to do something more with it than a cat video could do on Instagram. And so I feel like at the very least, I'm not going to protect them, but hopefully I can offer them an insight that they can go down a path of protecting themselves. Just nudge them in the right direction.
So you've taken on kind of a core responsibility for your audience to nudge them in the right direction. And, you know, it just shows basically a root of caring.
Yeah. I mean, I do care. I care deeply about and that was the problem for so many years, is I cared so deeply about my audiences, but I wasn't extending that same level of care to my actual friends and family, which was the big moment of conflict that changed my life and led to what I talk about in the TED Talk, and led to the career I now have in human connection and making this my life's work as opposed to magic. But yeah,
Let me stop you there.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Because this is such a seminal moment. Basically, this is another huge breakthrough moment for you. And we won't talk your TED Talk because people can go find that, and we'll put that in the show notes. But was that moment that you described in your TED Talk, was that the moment where it clicked for you, where the light came on, that you knew how to use magic to care for someone?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I don't think it was any one specific moment. I think it was a collision of getting really good at doing it on stage and having every personal relationship falling apart around me at the exact same time. Getting rave reviews and standing ovations and clients who needed to have me back over and over, and people coming up to me after magic shows, to like crying sometimes, to thank me because 2 weeks ago my husband of 40 years passed, and this is the first thing I've done since it happened, and I came to your show and I haven't laughed like that. And you know, I was having that on stage, and behind the scenes I felt like a fraud. Behind the scenes, relationships, friends, family, it felt like everybody hated me. They just wanted nothing to do with me. They just,
wow,
because I wasn't extending them. I wasn't showing them. All of my energy was in my work. I was so good at doing it professionally. But I forgot I was focused on my work, and I forgot about my life, you know. And
what
so
brought
at the
about
same
your
time, those two
awareness?
things were happening.
Yeah, so that polarity was going on. Both were there together. And what was the breaking point? What happened and what changed?
The actual breaking point was a long-time friend, not Adam, who we talked about earlier, but a long-time friend telling me in retrospect about an experience we'd had in college that I had never seen. I didn't even realize had been taken the way that it had been taken. And he described this falling out he had with me, even though we'd been friends since childhood. And because I remember at some point in college, this guy had been friends with for so long, so close with, similar to Adam at that time, until that time, and then like vanished from my life and didn't want to take my calls anymore. And when I was in town, didn't want to hang out, didn't want to see me, never had time for me. I remember thinking, he's such a jerk. What is he doing? Like, and then years later, finding out when we kind of reconnected, because he got sick. Actually, he got sick, and we very very young, and we reconnected. He's fine now. But we opened up about that, and he said, "Well, here's what happened." And he said, because I was like, "What? You disappeared for years. What the hell?" Kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're sick, and we haven't talked in so many years. And he was like, "Well, you were kind of an ass." And like he was like, like you, and he like described the falling out process with me, and as he started to, there was no reason for him to lie in that moment. I remember he was describing this stuff, and I was just going, I didn't even, I had no idea I was doing that to people. And then after it was like the floodgates open after he broke that, like shattered the illusion, right, that you have of yourself. Shattered that illusion, and I started thinking about relationships that had failed, and other friends that had stopped reaching out, and family that never wanted to talk anymore, and it just, everything fell apart, and I had to rebuild my life. And so I decided to rebuild my life, and I decided to take what I was so good at on stage and say, what if I did that in my life? No, I did it the reverse way I think most people do it. They figure out what they're good at in their life and they put it into their jobs. I did it the opposite way. And
that really rhymes, Brian, because, there you were, a master of illusion. And then this, dear friend that you'd lost connection with shattered your illusions personally. Like he broke open your blind spot. And that was the beginning of you forming a new connection to magic. And it does kind of rhyme with your why. That basically you also care about shattering the illusion. Like, here you are, a magician. You're performing as a magician. But
Is that a fire alarm in the middle of this? Do you have to go? You have to go, right?
I don't. Well, that's absurd. Isn't that wonderful?
I was gonna say, this has been a very tame conversation compared to the absurdity I was expecting, and there it is, right on cue. Lovely. I mean, tame not in a bad way. Tame in a, I was thinking this was gonna be more absurd than it has been. It's been a very lovely, very deep conversation. But there it is. Perfect. There had to be something.
The absurdity was baked in the cake, but just a little muted until that moment. What I'm finding really fascinating is that you learned how to create illusions. And as you got better and better at that, your personal connections were
That's fantastic. Is that a test that they're doing, or
yes,
or what? That's a test.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, fascinating. It's lovely.
So your personal connection, the network of your personal connections was failing even as you were succeeding, until this friend shattered your illusions and woke you up, essentially. And then it created this cascade effect, I assume, over time, that then resulted, or we could say a ripple effect, that resulted in you going back to give the importance to those connections and to that network, and then threading that through to bring connection to people through your magic, which resulted in the story that you share in your TED Talk, which we won't spoil because it's such a beautiful talk that people can go and hear it. And is that correct?
Yeah, it sure when you put it like that, it sure sounds like it. Yeah. 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 I mean, no intention though behind that, and that's to our earlier conversation about the
Mm-hmm.
survivorship bias. That's just what happened. It wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
there was some grand
Mm-hmm.
plan of getting good at this and discovering that, and then I'll do this. I Every time anybody's ever asked me about either my life or career, and they say, "Wow, you've done all these different things, and you've been successful in these ways," and what's your secret kind of to doing all that? And my pithy, useless answer is always, "I just do whatever's next."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
all we can do.
Okay. You do whatever's next, but you also leap and the net appears.
Sure seems to. Yeah, there always seems to be a net. I guess there's always going to be a net until the day there isn't, and at that point we're not having this conversation, right? So
Then we're in the
you
Darwin
know,
Awards.
then we're in the Darwin Awards. It seems a shame for some people to not know they won the Darwin Awards, but that's okay. So yeah,
How do you
yeah,
know that they
yeah.
don't know?
Well, if they won them enough, if they won them at such a level, they'll never find out.
Well,
Some
does
some
that mean
people,
you don't believe in
a
the
lot of
other
people
side?
win. That Yes, I mean, in if we want to get a lot of people who watch this show to hate me, then yeah, I here's I don't know. Nobody knows.
Mm-hmm. Have you, for instance, in the course of your life, have you ever, you don't, you're saying empirically you can't prove that there's an afterlife. You can't be sure of that. So therefore you won't say that there is. But what about in your life? Has there ever been an experience through absurdity or other circumstances of any kind? Has there ever been a circumstance in which you did access some greater sense of self, some larger sense of your own being that was beyond Brian?
Well, yeah. I mean, so this is why we get into weird philosophy of language stuff when you talk about what do people mean by spirituality, by the universe, like absolutely. I mean, we've talked a lot about it already, today. This discovering that there's a great that I can in my life I can be a vessel for something bigger than simply my own needs and my own wants and desires. I discovered that as a magician. I discovered it becoming a speaker and a writer. The things that I've decided to dedicate my life to have been in there when I'm best. When I'm at my best is when I'm doing those things for selfless aims, not because I think it'll bring me more business or whatever, but because I think it's the right thing to do and it's worthy of pursuing. So that's a bigger than me
Mm-hmm.
kind of a thing. But for me, there is nothing supernatural or spiritual or otherworldly wrapped up in that. I don't get that feeling that many people seem to have when they describe
Mm-hmm.
faith or a sense of there's a bigger purpose for their life. I don't think there's a bigger purpose for my life. I think I've given my life a bigger purpose. I've
Mm-hmm.
never felt an intervention that I would describe as anything other than here, the empirical,
Mm-hmm.
I can see a reason why that happened and I can make a decision, which isn't to say there isn't something else. It's just
Mm-hmm.
to say I've never felt it and
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen a reason to believe it. Because if I had ever felt it, I wouldn't need the proof. That's the whole thing, right? People who believe don't need proof. They have faith
Mm-hmm.
because they feel it. And
Mm-hmm.
if I've never felt it. I've
Uh-huh.
never I did Catholic school. I was raised Jewish at one house and Catholic at the other. I was confirmed. I did all the classes. I never felt it, which is not to take away from people who have. It just
Mm-hmm.
never hit me that way.
Mm-hmm. You haven't felt it yet.
Yet, there's always a yet.
Mm-hmm. There's always an ellipsis.
The closest I've ever come to feeling that is my son being born and going through that as a parent, seeing
Mm-hmm.
that my life is truly not mine, and it's not about me anymore, if it ever was, is that clearly I'm here for him, you know. Again, I don't feel that in a supernatural way, but I feel it in a very primal way. That's that
Yeah.
when when I wasn't a parent, before I was a parent, I'd heard parents describe that. We've all heard parents describe that. And I always thought I got it. I thought I got it because people describe it, and sometimes they describe it really well. And then you become a parent, you realize I never got it. You can't get it until that kid comes out, and you're like, oh my God, nothing else matters. Like keeping this kid alive and raising him or her or they to the best possible version of themselves within your means and your capabilities is your only purpose now. And everything else is bonus, extra. That's as close as I've ever come to feeling something like what you're describing.
When you became a parent, it became apparent that it was not about you, that your life is not just yours, and that it's about being bigger than yourself alone.
Yeah. You need to set an example, you know, it's that thing too. I keep trying to have a better work-life balance. I don't always succeed, but I used to say, oh, my New Year's resolution is to have a better work-life balance. I never meant it because I had no reason to. I had no reason to mean that. You know, I mean, my wife and I, you know, we had a great relationship, and sometimes she wished I worked a little bit less on the nights and weekends, but I'd always done that since the day we met, so it was never a real problem because it was just part of who I was, and she knew that before she married me. And but you know, with a kid, it's like, oh, I really need a life. I need to have time. I need to have time not just to physically be there, but to emotionally be there. And that's the harder part, is that it's easy for me to walk out of my studio and to be in the living room with my kid. It's harder for me to be in the living room with my kid and not be thinking about the stuff that's back in my studio. Thinking about the projects I have, thinking about I've got an interview with, you know, Alicia coming up. And I gotta make sure because I want to be authentic to that relationship too. I want to be there to connect with you, but I don't want to be thinking about that while I'm supposed to be thinking about just the joyous experience I'm having sitting on the floor with my kid while he's discovering something for the very first time. And you can't nobody could do that perfectly. It just doesn't, it's not realistic, but it's an ideal that I feel more strongly now than ever. And I've been doing everything that I can to, you know, live up to that ideal. And I'm dangerously close to buying a second phone that has no apps on it apart from just it's an emergency and it has a camera, just to leave my actual work phone in the office. I'm coming dangerously close to doing that because I think I'm sure through the ages there's always been some version of this problem, but I'm guessing our generation is having a harder time with it than any generation in human history because of smartphones and the constant technology. So yeah, I don't remember what your original question was or how we got here, but that's where we are.
we were talking about bigger than me, and
Yeah.
I believe you saw that is such an important thing for you as a parent. And then there's this technology web that's sort of, especially in the new abnormal, where you're working from home and excuse the pun, but juggling so many balls, and so that that becomes sort of the crisis of connection, is to be able to put aside just this technological overwhelm in order to be present to what matters most to you.
Yeah. That all sounds right. Good summary.
Well, I was hoping you'd have a moment to mentor me in my budding magical skills.
Oh, absolutely. If you're going to show me a trick, 100% yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So I have this empty hat. Okay.
Indeed.
You can see. It's empty.
I do. Yes.
Okay. All right. And then suddenly there's a hand inside. It's
there
a practice hand.
There's a hand in the hat.
It's a practice hand. Okay.
Very good.
So,
okay.
All right. We did that. All right. And then there's some Thanksgiving Valentine,
Oh, very
fake
good.
roses.
Oh, very good. Very
I'm
good.
giving thanks that you're my Valentine.
It is my pleasure, and I will say on that, what's so funny about what you just did, even though you did that as a joke, is fundamentally that is actually how magicians do the tricks you just described. They just do it without you actually seeing what they just did. That is literally how it works, though, what you just did.
Are you saying that I'm a natural?
No. Nobody's a natural. It's all hard work.
Are you saying that I have potential?
I'm saying everybody has potential. If you want to be a magician, go be a magician. If you want to be a painter or a speaker or a connector of people, go do those things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and your math and your magic and everything about you today. And I hope that we will continue our existential conversations in the future.
I hope so too. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Brian.